Have it?
Yeah.
Okay, we are recording.
Okay, brilliant.
So carry on.
Okay, so
How's my hair? Is my hair good? I know,
nice and flat.
I know it's bad. I didn't take a shower, nothing. I'm just here. And incidentally, and you're not going to find out whether or not I'm wearing pants. You can just wonder, right? I put on a coat. That's all I do. Matter of fact, I got a story for you that may entertain people. Years ago at Lackland Air Force Base, we had an officer who was commander of ops for a while, and he had a reputation for great eccentricity. So at one point, a friend of mine went in for a vicious counseling because he'd done something unacceptable, right? So he gets dressed up in his most crisp uniform, polishes his boots, all that kind of stuff, goes and sits there in the guy's outer office, kind of nervous, right? Finally gets told to go into the office, and the guy's an E7 at the time, right? So he's not a junior NCO. He has some experience, has some knowledge. Goes and sits down in the guy's office. The officer's sitting there. Officer's got nice crisp uniform on, his rank, the whole deal. He's looking good. They start the counseling. My buddy gets counseled like rigorously, right? And then the officer pushes the piece of paper over to him and says, please sign here. And he says, okay, can I borrow a pen, please? And the officer looks around for the pen, pulls open his drawer, can't find one, says, excuse me. And he stands up and walks over to another piece of furniture to get a pen, and he's not wearing pants.
There's no way that's true.
Truth, man. He's not wearing pants. It's boxers. And my buddy was like,
"Oh man, do that. They put a report on you."
Amazing. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead. Question.
Okay, so moving on past mentors. So there's been a slight change in the training realm, like where we've gone, where we've been, stuff like that. Talk a little bit about CST, what we're kind of using and where you would like things to go, or what you have seen been changed in the past, from the 1980s till 2020.
Okay, well, 1980s to 2020 is a huge topic. So I'll just kind of cut it down to, not that I don't want to talk about it, it's just we lack the time.
Sure.
I'll just kind of cut it down to DoD history. And what I would say is that I wound up in a position of influence as the chief of the military working dog course. And everyone knew I was a dog trainer, and we needed to get a little bit better results in training. And so I began introducing new methods. Now, I didn't originate the methods. These are just methods that I learned from other people, like some of the people that I've discussed to you guys. One of those was DFR, Deferred Final Response Training. And that was kind of a step in the modern direction. Most of the people doing really, really progressive detection training now, they turn it on its head. They turn it absolutely backward. We taught dogs to search. We taught dogs to recognize odor. Then we tried to teach final response. In a DFR setting with a really drivey dog, that could be difficult, right? Well,
sure.
What really contemporary modern detector trainers often do is they teach final response first in the course of teaching final response, and then they teach odor recognition. And then finally, they teach the dog, hey, you're going to have to walk over 10 feet to find the thing you're going to respond to. Oh, hey, now the thing you're going to respond to is behind something else. So you got to go behind it and look for it. Finally, the thing you're going to find and respond to is invisible, and you got to search for it with your nose, right?
Yeah.
So DFR was kind of a move in that direction. And it was very useful because it produced really intense search on the dogs and really, really high levels of independence. So a really good DFR dog is the strong part of the dog is that the dog is very, very independent, and you can't make him false respond. You can't, you as the handler can't make him do stuff. The weak part of the dog is you can't make him do stuff, right?
Sure.
Real strong DFR dog is difficult to influence while he's searching. But if you asked me, I think people have all kinds of different opinions, but if you asked me, DFR wasn't a perfect system, but it was a really important step forward to modernize us and get us in the direction that we need to move. We as DoD, the DoD MWD community. The next thing we introduced sometime later was clear signals training. And this was directly as a result of working with Yvonne and having exposure to Michael Ellis and stuff like that. So basically CST is dumbed down Balabanov and Ellis, not done as well as they can do it, right?
Gotcha.
But that's what it is. And hopefully what we did is thank you. Hopefully what we did is we ruggedized it, made it hard to break, made it hard to get really bad results, all that kind of stuff. And I am really, DOD can discourage you, right? Like DOD can wear you down after a few years. And so sometimes I get discouraged. I think to myself, what difference have I made? How have I made things better? And every now and again, I'll be driving through the training areas at Lackland and I'll see some troop I don't even know, right? I don't even know the guy's name. And he's doing great obedience, right? The dog's got his head up, he's got his tail up, he's fluent, relaxed, he's powerful and energetic. He understands the skill. And I'll just stop to watch that for a while. I will stop to watch that shit because I think that's the single biggest marker of the progress we've made in the last 20 years. And so it's now normal for DOD guys to not escape dogs into obedience skills, but to use positive reinforcement to teach them, then layer over aversives to gain, complete control of them, and to have powerful active dogs. It's kind of normal. And that's a huge step forward and influences everything else that we do. I never had much of an effect on the way dogs were patrol trained, partly because we never canonized it. We never did a video or did a paper or anything like that. But there's a guy at a military working dog course now named Master Sergeant Angel Landau. And Angel, actually, he's another person I'd mention as a mentor and an influence, because Angel is brilliant. Angel does absolutely brilliant work, and he works on such a subtle level of understanding dogs. Like you have to know a lot just to be able to understand what he's doing, right? And you still might have to ask him questions. He's crazy creative, and he's also really courageous in the sense that he's never scared to make a mistake. He's never scared to do something that may or may not work with the dog to see what the effect is and test it out. He's not hung up on that, right? He just wants to learn more. So he actually is extremely influential right now because he's the senior NCO in MWDC, Military Working Dog Course, has been there a long time, and he's really, really good. And his heart's in the right place, and he teaches well and all that kind of stuff. And he is very influential right now on how biting dogs are trained in MWDC, and there's a lot less emphasis on force. So Angel is very adept at figuring out quote unquote operant ways, positive reinforcement ways of getting dogs to behave even in bite work. So that isn't my accomplishment. That's more Angel's accomplishment, but that's another big step forward for us.
Beautifully said. And who knows where we're going to be in the next 10 to 20 years. You'll be retired, I hope. But
yeah, we won't be here. We'll be in a very interesting place. This is a really exciting time to be a dog trainer because important changes are happening faster now than ever happened at any point in my career in the last 40 years.
Yeah, especially with like interviews and stuff like this, where it's just widespread information.
Yeah.
Okay.
The info thing is important because we used to have to drive halfway across the country and go to a seminar to learn, and you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the operant conditioning question. If you wouldn't mind, do you have the question right there with you?
Yeah, I do.
Everyone's basically already seen it, but.
Okay. So I'm not exactly going to answer the question as it's written. I'm just going to kind of dilate on the subject of operant conditioning. And the first thing is to understand what we invoke when we use the expression operant conditioning. First of all, you're discussing all of dog training, right? Like if you're out there, it doesn't matter if you even know the word operant. It doesn't matter if you've never been educated by anybody about using food or whatever. You're still using the neurological apparatus that evolution gave animals to adapt to their immediate circumstances, right? And that covers all four quadrants of the contingency square, like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. That covers pretty much all that we do in dog training, whether we're doing good dog training or whether we're doing bad dog training, right? So everybody uses operant conditioning. The next thing is what we invoke by using operant conditioning instead of another expression. Operant conditioning is a term coined by B.F. Skinner. The term before B.F. Skinner for voluntary responding modified by its consequences was instrumental conditioning, right, from Thorndike. And then Skinner, he was kind of, how to put it, he wanted to be an authority, he wanted to change the world, and part of that is giving new names to things, right, to kind of claim them as your own and get your own influence. And so he took instrumental conditioning, pulled out what he thought were the really important points, and called it operant conditioning. And operant covers the kind of context in which the animals behaved. It also covers a bias. The bias is a bias towards positive reinforcement, because B.F. Skinner was a radical behaviorist, and his belief was punishment doesn't work. Don't punish animals, don't punish children, it doesn't work. Well, that's bullshit, right? Punishment can work very, very well, which is why, for instance, I follow the speed limit most of the time and, all that kind of stuff. Punishment works super, super well. Now, of course, many of us really mess it up in dog training, but it's a really important way in which animals, including dogs, adapt to their immediate circumstances, and dog trainers can make use of it. Well, when you say operant conditioning, you're kind of kicking all that to the curb. Most of the people who talk about operant conditioning, they're positive reinforcement oriented. Many of them have a strong value judgment about whether or not it's okay to use aversive control, whether it's okay to make an animal do something, and so forth. So I tend to use the word instrumental conditioning instead of operant conditioning. It means fundamentally the same thing, but kind of without the theoretical bias, right? And but still, we got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, the whole deal. It's all there. Now, we haven't talked about Pavlovian. I said operant conditioning covers all of training. Well, in the case of Pavlovian, it covers most of Pavlovian too, because if you think about it, we do relatively few strict Pavlovian procedures. And for the viewers, if you guys recall, the critical association in instrumental conditioning is between a response and an outcome, right? Between a behavior on the dog's part and an environmental event that takes place. The critical association in a Pavlovian contingency is between two different stimuli, right? And if you think about it, and you don't try to control what the dog does, you just expose the animal to one stimulus and another stimulus, and you counter condition or do whatever you're going to do. There are relatively few strict Pavlovian procedures we use. One of them is counter conditioning gunfire with the ball. That's pretty much straight Pavlovian. Doesn't need operant or instrumental conditioning to explain it. Can be explained in the course of by using Pavlovian conditioning theory. Another one is teaching recognition of odor. So very often the way we teach recognition of odor is we present odor, environmental stimulus, and immediately afterward we present a really strong goal or reward for the dog. That's a Pavlovian procedure. But pretty much, and what makes it Pavlovian is you're not trying to control what the dog does, right? You're not, the reward that you give the dog isn't a function of what he did. It just always comes after the first thing, right?
Sure.
Because of Pavlovian conditioning, that takes control of the animal's behavior, and you start to see the conditioned products of the Pavlovian association. So the first part of it is, don't think there's anything super special about operant conditioning. It's just a new kind of a buzzword that some people adopt because it kind of dovetails with their theoretical perspective on dog training. I prefer to use instrumental because it's kind of more capacious, and because I'm not a positive reinforcement Nazi, I think it's normal at a point in the dog's development to start using aversive control to get the result that we need. And let me see. And remember that I kind of made this point implicitly, but I didn't make it explicit. I'll make it explicit now. Any instrumental procedure that you carry out with the dog, any instrumental conditioning procedure, will have embedded in it a Pavlovian procedure, right? So let's say I'm using the command sit to get the dog to sit, and then I give him food, right? Well, I'm thinking about the association between sitting and getting food, but without thinking about it, I'm making a Pavlovian presentation of the command sit and a little bit later the word food. And what that does is it conditions the word food so that it takes on an appetitive or pleasant kind of association for the dog. So when I do instrumental conditioning, I cannot avoid also doing Pavlovian conditioning because I'm presenting chains of stimuli, one stimulus, then another stimulus. Yes. Now, where that gets important is, and that can be transparent to the trainer as long as the Pavlovian contingency, the kind of behavior it makes the dog show, is concordant with what the instrumental contingency is asking the dog to do. So when we use food to teach a dog to sit, as a result of Pavlovian conditioning, the dog will start to orient, will start to sign tract and approach the hand in which you hold the food. He'll lift his head. That'll tend to bring his ass end down. So anything you teach the dog in this context, both the Pavlovian conditioning contingency and the instrumental conditioning, right? Pavlovian is after I say sit, you get fed. Instrumental is after you sit, if you sit, you get fed, right? In this context, what the dog learns as a function of Pavlovian conditioning doesn't interfere with what you're trying to teach him as a function of instrumental conditioning. But that ain't always the case. So now let's go back to good old escape training, right? Where you take a naive dog who doesn't know how to sit, you put a choke chain on him, and you tell him to sit, and then you choke his ass into the sit. Well, again, what you're creating is a Pavlovian conditioning contingency between the word sit and the signals that you give when you want the dog to sit and choking, right? And you get Pavlovian condition responding out of it. What would the Pavlovian conditioning be? Stiffening, stress, and aggression, right?
Oh yeah.
So if we're teaching sit with food, we don't have to be thinking very much about the Pavlovian contingency because it'll just help what we're trying to do. If we're teaching something critical using aversive control, and a good trainer does this as little as possible, if we're teaching something critical using aversive control, what the dog learns to do from instrumental conditioning standpoint may not map well onto what he learns to do from a Pavlovian thing, right? So you get a dog who, when you say sit, he freezes defensively, right? Or when you say sit, he bites your hand off, right?
Sure.
He anticipates you choking him. So now let's talk about what the common faults are. Like where do we fail in applying instrumental conditioning? Now, the core of instrumental conditioning is not, well, the core is definitely that a response is followed by a consequence, right? But there's another part that characterizes most of the good dog training that's done today. And this is the new part, right? Like I was messing with positive reinforcement in the early 80s, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't get anything real important done. Later on, people came and they started to realize how to really train the dogs to understand and carry out movements and all that kind of stuff. And the big advantage they had that I didn't have is that at that time, 20 years later, the exotic animal training tradition had begun to penetrate the dog training tradition, first through AKC, and then in a roundabout way, police and sport. And in a funny kind of way, sport was, as police is the police training is the slowest to change in this direction, but sport was real slow to change in that direction too. And what made it work is the stuff we've already talked about. Behavior marking, right? Response marking, communicating information to the dog in a set language so he knows instantly what the outcome of his behavior is going to be, right?
Yes.
So that's the core of it. So what most of us do is subsumed in, really described by two facts. One of them is that we're conditioning the animal to show behaviors more strongly or more often, or show behaviors less strongly and less often based on what happens as a consequence. And the other one is we're not waiting for the dog to find out what the consequence is. We're telling him instantly if he's done the right thing or the wrong thing, marking the behavior, and then later on we apply the reinforcer or the punishment. And I won't get into that, but some very, very interesting things happen there. Like reinforcement and punishment work completely different in a signaled context than they do in an unsignaled context. So the thing, and here's the rub, there is a lot of technique involved in positive reinforcement work, right? And in particular, one of the things that plagues everybody, I mean, you'll catch me doing this, right? Like I have a pet dog here, I'm training for somebody, and you can come watch my training session and you'll catch me breaking the rule. And what the rule is that the signal that you use to mark a behavior, it must precede the consequence, right? So if I'm going to use a pinch collar, say no and use a pinch collar, I don't do it like this. The dog misbehaves. I walk over to him, grab his collar and go, no, 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 right? That makes no just part of the punishment. There's no new information that comes with no. You might as well, you're wasting your breath. The way we should be doing things is by saying no in temporal contingency with, meaning immediately after something that the dog did, and then later on we can punish or omit positive reinforcement or whatever, right?
Yes.
Now there are a number of different kinds of behavior markers. The kind of coolest and sexiest one is the terminal release, which in a DoD context is the word yes. Other people use a clicker. Some of the exotic animal people use computer-generated tones in the water and whistles and all kinds of stuff. But basically, the terminal release is a marker that tells the dog not only, hey, what you just did was fully successful, or what you just did was fully unsuccessful, and you know what's going to happen next. And so it's a release, right? The animal stops behaving. If he's sitting and you say yes and he's well trained, he stops sitting and does whatever occurs to him, which is usually come to you for reinforcement, et cetera, et cetera. Where people go wrong, and this is me and everybody, this is why you have to have a mirror while you train or have a training partner who tells you what you're doing and so forth, is not only must you give the signal and then provide the consequence, but you have to make sure that you don't associate any other predictive cues with the consequence. So what I mean by that is if my positive reinforcement is a Kong I'm going to take out of my pocket, and the dog is right in front of me, he sits, here's my hand, he sits, and I go, yes. My yes is not going to be important to the dog, right? Because it doesn't give him added information. Dogs are very, very attuned to physical movements and gestures. So he is super disposed to be conditioned in a Pavlovian sense by the movement of my hand. So all I have to do is move my hand and the dog gets more excited. So if I move my hand at the same time that I say yes, the dog kind of neglects the yes. He doesn't pay attention to the yes, right?
Sure.
What I have to do is say yes when he performs correctly. And this is the hard part. Refrain from doing anything else, right? Don't move your hand, don't move your head, don't make your rain jacket make a noise, none of that stuff. There has to be a moment of nothing so that the word yes totally predicts for the dog what's going to happen next, which is your hand moving and getting the Kong out and stuff like that. That is the most common fault in this kind of work. And it's kind of like in football, people say, got to go back to basic tackling practice. Well, it's fundamental, but it ain't easy, which means you got to think about it all the time and you got to practice it all the time. That's the way behavior marking is the technique has to be clean. And you very often need somebody to be a policeman to help you be clean. Otherwise, the terminal release will not have the conditioning and the teaching power that it could have. So the question is, how do I tell if this particular handler's terminal bridge, his terminal release, is fully conditioned, is conditioned the way that I think makes it the most effective tool? And that's a function of the dog's release. So very, very often, like if you're working with somebody and they're using the word yes, or they're using any kind of terminal marker, one thing that's very helpful is to do a little diagnostic test and say, okay, put your dog in a sit or put your dog in a down and just say yes. Don't move your head. Don't move your hand. Don't do it. Just say yes.
I don't even have a toy on you.
Exactly. And a dog that is very, very well trained will instantly release from whatever he's doing and show a ton of activity, like come over to you to get the ball, all that kind of stuff. What you'll see very, very often, especially in people that you see them breaking that kind of rule of mark the dog, don't do anything else, now provide the consequence. If you see people breaking that rule and you want to show to them that they don't really have a release, they think they do, but they don't have a terminal bridge, is set this kind of thing up where they have them put their dog in a behavior, like make them look away from their dog or something, hold their arm still and say yes. And if the dog keeps sitting, guess what? He has not learned the yes the way we need him to learn it.
Sure, yeah. And that funny story on that, when I was at Michael's school, there was a girl that had a really, really, really hard time reaching for food prior to her using the clicker. And for 2 weeks straight, every day, all day, he was so patient with this woman. I've never seen him more patient. Man, I was in a very soothing mode just going to his school, and he would just correct her, say, no, that's incorrect. You, for 2 weeks straight, all day long. By the last day, she finally started to get it. I was just like, some people, it's hard to break those habits.
Yeah, Michael's imperturbable, but it's the most basic thing. It's the tackling of training based on instrumental conditioning. You got to do it right. You got to think about doing it right, and you have to have people help you to do it right. Okay, what's your next question? You there, Chris? Uh-oh. Are you back? Lost you for a second. Can't hear you. Hang on.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I think we lost signal for a little while.
Yeah, it's me. It's always me. Trust me.
All right. Okay, let's go on to another question.
Okay. Let's talk about genetics.
Okay.
All right. This seems to be a hot topic when I talk to everybody. Are we going to make an excuse to not train this? Can we actually fix this? How much of this is genetics? What are we looking at during the selection process that we think isn't going to necessarily be trainable, like it's largely predisposed by their genetics? The pros and cons, essentially, too, when you're training, a dog that has amazing blood versus, a dog that gets through it. I call them a buy one, get one half off dog, a BOGO dog.
Yeah.
We buy the beast, and then we get the other ones that are like 3s and 4s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let's see. Okay. The first thing to realize is that Bob Bailey is an interesting guy who's had a lot of influence on dog training in the last few years. And probably our viewers know who he is, so I won't go into it. But one of the things that he says in his seminars always is, given enough time, anybody can train an animal to do anything using any method, right? Now, I think there's limitations to that, because I've been totally unable to train a dog to do something before, no matter how hard I tried. But there's a principle there, which is, in order to create something, you don't need the perfect method. You just need time and persistence and self-control, right? And in the same way, you don't need a perfect dog. And there are people out there who are such good technicians of training things like full bites that they can take a dog with no genetic predisposition to biting full, and they can make that dog bite very, very full and steady, right? So there are people out there who can condition pretty bad dogs to look like really, really good dogs. And so that kind of gets you into the question of, okay, should I stick with this dog and keep training this to try to make him better, or do I need a new dog? And that's kind of in our agency kind of a setting, that's not a personal decision, that's an administrative decision. If you're working with your own dogs, it's a personal decision. So even though I know that given enough persistence and talent, I can train a dog to do all kinds of stuff, since I'm not a very good dog trainer and I have finite time, and one of my faults is impatience and all kinds of stuff like that, for me, there's a certain cutoff where I won't mess with a dog. I will concede that it's possible he could be taught to show the behavior we want, but I'm not going to try to do it. I would prefer to get another dog that it's easier to get done with, right? And we're often, in an agency sense, we're often in that place. Like, so for instance, a dog that might be eliminated from training may be a super good animal and all he needs is another 6 months, but we don't have another 6 months. We don't want to use a year to get one dog. We want to use a year to get 2 dogs, right? Yeah. So in an administrative kind of agency sense, often the thing to do is to emphasize the quality of the dog, to try to make sure that we get dogs that are at low risk of elimination and can be trained relatively easily without a ton of technical knowledge, right? Now, kind of overlapping that, let's talk about character, basically. Character is an expression used by primarily by Europeans to describe working dog behavior. So in the United States, if somebody wants to describe a dog's behavior, they'll use the word temperament. And temperament in Europe means something totally different. It means how lively and responsive the dog is. It doesn't refer to his courage or his nerves or any of that kind of stuff, right? The word character describes all of that stuff. So all the dogs out there can be classed in terms of their character. You have different ways of assigning different dogs to different classes and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Basically what I do is I class good dogs, meaning dogs that are useful, you can use them for work, in 3 tiers. The first class dogs are top tier working animals. They're often suitable for breeding based on their character. They bite full automatically, and they show many other behaviors just naturally based on their genetics. Second class dogs are dogs with flaws, with weak spots and sensitivities, but when properly handled and trained, they're still valuable dogs. Third class dogs are the ones that we can get the work done with, but all the time we wish we had a little more dog to work with, right?
Yeah.
So now let's go back. Does this mean we all need first class dogs? No, it doesn't mean that. If I'm a breeder, which I am, I need first class dogs to breed from. But if I'm just a trainer working on the field, I might be better off with a second class dog, because first class dogs, first of all, it'll be easier to find a second class dog. It'll be cheaper to find a second class dog. And also a second class dog might be a hell of a lot easier to get along with than a first class dog, because first class dogs are a pain in the ass, right? These are really, really powerful dogs. And this is why I don't have breeding males at Lackland Air Force Base, because I don't want some strong ass male dog in a pen with not enough to do, because after a couple of years, he's going to get dangerous, right? So, so the simple fact is, most of us are going to work with what I call second class dogs, because that's what's available, you know, that's what's there. And in some cases, we're better off with those dogs. And if you ask me what's the goal of the breeding program, it's not produce 100% first class dogs, because most people can't handle that kind of dog. They can't do useful work with that kind of dog.
Yeah.
Many more people can be successful with what I call second class dogs. Now, the dog has to have some quality, the dog has to have some strong points, but it means that you find a weakness. When you evaluate the dog, you find a weakness that you need to work on, not in terms of conditioning, like he doesn't sit quite correctly or something like that, but in terms of, okay, in civil aggression, when the decoy gets really close, the dog doesn't try to bite. He just lays back off the leash and waits for the guy to pick the sleeve up, then he tries to bite, right? Or when the dog's biting, he tends to bite with a little bit of a noisy bite and shifting bite and all kinds of stuff like that. Now, he's still biting you, right? We don't give a shit if the dog bites somebody. We don't give a shit if the dog bites pretty or not, as long as he bites, right? So at a certain level, the cosmetics and the aesthetic value of the performance are not important. So what we have to do is pick dogs with the right kind of weaknesses. One of the test questions that I used to ask people when they were before boards for hiring a Lackland Air Force Base to be trainers was I would ask them basically to choose for DOD between a dog that shows super strong civil aggressive behavior, like he's ready to tear your face off when you threaten him and shows every intent to bite when you get close, but he's a little stressy and nervous when he's on the bite. That's your one dog you can choose. Or you can choose another dog who, when you civil agitate him, he sits at the end of the leash looking interested, but doesn't do a lot more than look interested. But when you break the sleeve out of the suit, he bites like a grizzly bear, right? Which of those dogs is most likely to succeed in our line of work as a patrol dog? I think everybody has a different opinion. I've heard well-reasoned arguments on both sides, but my argument is we should take that first dog, that dog that has a little weak spot in it, right? So when a dog shows, sometimes it's referred to as defense. I think of it just as aggression. But when the dog shows expressive threat, what I mean by expressive threat is he shows his teeth, he barks, his hair bristles, his ears do a particular thing, his tail does a particular thing. Dogs that show that kind of expressive threat, they're under stress. And that's where the threat comes from, right? You can think of it like somebody talking shit real loud to somebody else because he's afraid of the guy and he's trying not to let on that he is, right? And so that dog who is super, super strong civil and really impressive and threatening, he's expressing a little bit of weakness. It's important to understand that, right? Now, does that, and where will the weakness be expressed? The weakness will be expressed in you can break him. If you push him too hard, expose him to enough stress, you can break him, particularly if you do it cumulatively, right? Like you don't make every day a challenge for a biting dog. You know, every 10th day is a challenge for a biting dog to make him stronger. The days before that are teaching and, you know, feel good and all kinds of stuff like that. The other sense in which they're more at risk is they tend to not bite as well, because if a dog is under stress, he normally does not want to engulf, because a prey bite is an engulfing and approaching bite. An aggressive bite is often a repelling bite, like boom, make you go away, right?
Sure.
And so, and that can be expressed in a trained dog as a little bit of a partial bite, or a bite turned a little to the side, or a dog who crawls up your elbow or something like that. So that's the dog's weak point. He's totally ready to bite somebody, but I got to look out for his levels of stress. I got to make sure not to overstress him. And also I'm going to have some kind of technical work to do to try to make the dog's mouth while biting as good as it possibly can be, right? And also to make him feel in charge so he has the best stress resistance and all that kind of stuff. And if you ask me what the purpose of the breeding program is, so that's an example of a second class dog. It's a dog that you'd look at and go, I don't know if I want to breed puppies from that male, because there's a weak nerve in there, and I'm afraid that in his puppies, the weak nerve will take over. So I don't necessarily want to breed with that dog. Now, will he make a good police dog? Oh, hell yes, he can make a good police dog. And some things will be easier with him. So if you take a strong civil dog, it's the technical problem of how to get the dog to bite somebody in civil, bite somebody for real on the street, is much simpler than if you have a dog who bites without stress, barks without stress, and bites full, right? Because those dogs are often, why? Because those dogs are often completely bonded to the equipment, right? They're after the equipment because they're thinking about biting. A dog who's strong, civil, aggressive is thinking about backing you off, changing your behavior. He threatens you, right? So, and those can be super, super useful dogs. I refer to those as soldier dogs. So if I produce a nice dog with a flaw, I send that dog to the field and he can be a soldier, meaning we don't want to produce more dogs with him, but he's going to be great as an asset, right?
Yeah.
And in some people's hands, he'll do much, in a lot of people's hands, he'll do better than a first-class dog will, right? There's not many of us can work successfully with real powerhouse dogs that are hard, resilient, drivey, have aggression, the whole deal, right? That's asking a lot in our system to give everybody one of those dogs. So that's why, if you ask me, is the goal of the breeding program to produce 100% first-class dogs? I go, no. The goal of the breeding program is to produce enough first-class dogs to breed from, to produce scads of soldiers, good, strong second-class dogs that most handlers can succeed with, and that are up to most of the challenges that they will encounter in service if they're properly taught.
Which is mostly hunting anyways, because it's mostly detection oriented for the most part.
Yeah, it's mostly detective oriented. And if you think about it, years ago, we used to think of police patrol as the business of biting people. It's not. It's the business of finding people and controlling their behavior, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so what patrol dogs do is they tell you where people are, and they make first encounter so you don't have to, because that's very, very risky. So the dog is a proxy for risk. The dog takes the risk for us, right? But his fundamental job is to search and let us know if somebody's there, and to be completely under control and all that kind of stuff. And if you think about it, a good fox terrier can do 90% of the work that a good patrol dog does in terms of searching, barking to let you know somebody's there, all that kind of stuff, right? The issue of biting, that's something else. And also, in some cases, it's not the important part of the work. The important part of the work is the dog telling you where somebody is and controlling this, helping you control the situation, right?
Sure. Some good info right there. And yeah, like you said, there's a ton of different opinions on those two different types of dogs.
Oh yeah, you can hear really smart people, smart, experienced people create very good reasoning for each kind of dog. So I think what Subtle would tell you is he doesn't want that strong civil dog because he's too concerned about that weakness. And what Subtle always says is, I don't care if the dog's happy when he bites you. I don't care if the dog is thinking about killing rabbits when he bites you instead of fighting a deadly enemy. I just care that he bites you, right? So I think Subtle's answer was, oh, so you got a dog with a naturally good mouth that bites hard and bites steady and doesn't show any stress. You get another dog that shows stress, is totally ready to bite now without additional preparation, but doesn't bite ideally. I think Subtle would take the first dog. I think, well, here, let me tell you a story. This is a Kevin Sheldall story. So,
Okay.
So years ago, so Kevin had just started police dog. We're talking 80s, right? Kevin had just started police dog training, worked with a guy named Tom Brenneman, and they started to import and sell some police dogs and stuff like that. And what Kevin told me, he may or may not be happy with me telling this story. But what he told me was he got a dog in that had really goofy behavior, right? So for instance, when you sent him at the man, he'd run this big arc like this and then go to the man, right? What's that? That's ambivalence. That's conflict. That's the conflict between, I'd really rather run away, but there's some reasons I want to bite you too. And that ambivalence is expressed in that elliptical approach, right? Well, the dog was like that. He didn't bite very well. He was really growly and snarly and stuff like that. And so Kevin was, man, where can we place this dog where he'll be well used, right? So they finally, where he'll make the grade and be well used. So they finally find this like rural police department where fuck all is going on, right? Ain't nothing happening out there. What the police dogs do out there is search kids' lockers, and walk in and help them break up drinking parties. That's what the dogs do. So so Kevin sold the dog to a department like this. So everything's going great. And like 6 months later, what happens, I'm trying to figure out whether to tell you about the phone call first or the incident. Okay, I'll tell you about the incident first. So they have, what you often think about is some guy like some John Dillinger running away across the country and happening upon some department that has a dog, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, even if you're not in Chicago, you might still encounter a criminal out of Chicago if you're working in a cornfield someplace. And so this is what happened. So they get a call. I can't remember what it was, like a car chase, a guy trying to get away. He was escaped from prison, all this kind of stuff. And the guy who handled this dog wound up in a textbook police dog deployment situation where he's sitting there with his dog on an open field with a guy running away. And his dog is all keyed up on the guy and ready to go. It's like, oh my God. And the guy doesn't comply, right? The guy doesn't stop running. He keeps going. So the guy cuts loose of the dog. The dog comes down the field after the guy, runs his big, weird elliptical deal, right? Comes down the field. The guy sees the dog coming. The guy's a real tough guy. So he turns around, faces the dog off and goes like, I'll kick your ass. The dog, because he's not a very good dog, continues his button hook, goes behind the guy and bites the shit out of him on one of the cheeks of his ass, right? And the guy goes, yeah! And he whirls around at the dog, at which point the dog, because he's not a real good dog, lets go, backs up and starts to bay and circle the guy. Well, he's facing the dog. The dog's going around him, he's facing the dog. Meanwhile, the cops are approaching. That guy figures out, oh shit, they're gonna apprehend me. He tries to run. Dog bites him in the ass like a grizzly bear. The guy goes, yeah, turns around at the dog. Dog lets go and backs up, right? And so the entire impression produced was, wow, this is not a good police patrol dog. This is an inferior product. This is a third class dog, right? Well, the phone call Kevin got was a congratulatory phone call from the police department saying, this animal is the best patrol dog ever. He is awesome. And incidentally, how did you teach him that kind of crazy jujitsu? Right?
They thought it was purposeful.
Yeah, how did he learn that kind of jujitsu? Because if you think about it, what your dog has to do is detain somebody, and if your dog will run over and make somebody stop in a particular kind of deployment, if your dog will run over, make somebody stop and face them and make the guy afraid to get away, to try to get away, dog's doing his job. You don't care if he's a piece of shit or not, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, especially for the podunk towns.
So that's kind of my moral of the story where quality of dog is concerned. All of us all of us prefer to work with dogs of high quality, but all of us have of really high quality, right? But all of us are forced to work with dogs that have flaws and weaknesses. And if we're successful trainers and we appreciate the strong points of the dogs and have good technical skills to help the dogs cope with their weak points, we can have absolutely great dogs. And in some cases, dogs that you don't think of as really good police dogs are actually highly effective animals. They really, really do their job. And other dogs, so I used to teach a seminar about the distinction between aggression and prey, defense, fighting drive, prey drive, all that kind of stuff based on riser, right? All I was doing was stealing risers material. And at one point I was doing a seminar for a Florida police department, actually a Florida region of USPCA. And I was working with that threat approach that was shown me by Len Masana, right? So if you want to access aggression in a dog, and I think at that time in police dogs, we didn't have a lot of real high quality dogs. We tended to have a whole bunch of second-class dogs and sometimes third-class dogs. And if I have that kind of dog, then I want one that's a little on the sharp side. So I want to work with the dog's aggression, teach him how to handle aggressive situations, teach him to take control of them, teach him to manage his own stress, all that kind of stuff. And so these guys had this perfect setup where they had a horse barn with stalls. And there was like a faucet in the back going drip, 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 drip. And they could bring the dogs in this gloomy barn from one end, and I would do a threat approach on the dog from the other end. And we saw all kinds of interesting stuff. There were some dogs in that crew that had had many, many bites. Like one guy, I asked him after I worked his dog, I asked him, has your dog had any bites? The guy pulls out his wallet, goes like, and the plastic things go with like 20 bites of what his dog had done to people. And his dog messed people up, right? And so there were some veteran police dogs like this that had been in big fights with people, and being in a big fight with a dog, with somebody will change a dog, right? It'll make them a different dog. And so there were some dogs that were showing what for me were interesting and unusual behaviors, because I'd seldom worked with dogs that had had 30 bites, 40 bites, 50 bites, right? And there were a couple of dogs that just shouldn't be on the street at all. And then there was the highest quality dog in the whole seminar was a big Malinois male who bit like a beast and with a huge mouth and had a tremendous entry on the decoy and all that kind of stuff. But he had a really, really bad flaw, because all of that stuff can be based on prey, right? All that stuff can be based on prey, because a suit can just be prey. A person can just be prey if they want to make themselves prey. And what happened when we did this dog is I couldn't get the dog's attention, because when the dog came in, they practiced a bunch of building search with the dog. When the dog came in, the handler set up, holding the leash, looking down the aisle at me, and I was going to approach. And the problem was there was a door right there. And the dog registered on the door, the closed door, and said, oh, it's a building search. And he started to bark at the door and try to move towards the door. And nothing I could do would draw his attention. And that includes giving him a sting with a whip, grabbing his tail, pulling him off the ground. So I got this dog by the tail off the ground. The handler's holding the front end. I'm holding the back end. I'm pulling on it. I let go of him. What does he do? He goes back to the door, right? So that's a really brave dog, right? No stress at all. That's a super courageous animal. But he wasn't very disposed to bite people for real. He needed stimuli to help him, to support him, all that kind of stuff. The technical problem of getting him to bite somebody was going to be more difficult than other dogs at the seminar who weren't as high quality as he was, but were actually much better disposed to be trained as biting dogs by most of us with normal skills, right?
Very interesting to hear all that. There's going to be tons of people wanting to listen to this piece, because you don't usually get to hear every single minute detail of someone's opinion on these two different things. Because this is like one of the biggest topics in police dogs.
Well, yeah, and the conversation has changed a lot, because the quality of dog available is much higher than it was 30 years ago. So if I taught a police dog seminar 20 years ago, 30 years ago, normally I would see there are a couple of really nice dogs in the class that I would be happy to own. Then there's a whole bunch of second-class dogs who do the job, and some of them are even cool dogs they're highly effective. And then there's too many third-class dogs that I'm not sure will keep their officers safe, right? I don't feel good about those dogs. So it was normal for me to see that kind of profile. Most of the dogs at the seminar were dogs that if you ask me, do you want that dog as your street patrol dog? I go, So, but in the years after, I started to see, like I'd go teach a police dog seminar, there'd be 20 dogs there, and I'd be happy to own 12 of them, right? And that's kind of the way it's been going. And that may change your answer to, do you want a first-class dog or a dog with a little flaw or weakness? Because the first-class dogs they're not common, but they're becoming more and more common. And then the question is how to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of finishes up that question. We're gonna have some serious material here. So, what other questions? You said you might want to talk about some additional stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what. Do you want to do another edition of this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'll tell you what. Let's set another one up. Plan some questions. I'm kind of losing my voice, and I got something I got to do in a little while. So. Why don't we break this one off and process it, make it available to people, and then plan the next one?
That sounds like a perfect idea.
Okay.
So you're going to stop the record. Is that 12-year-old is he going to show you how we're going to be able to upload it?
Yeah, I might have to call him. But
Okay,
I think
cool.
the main thing is that I have it on my computer, right?
Sure.
So when I end the meeting, I'll find out if I have it on my computer, and I think I will because the last segment was there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Doc, go get your stuff done. I got duty. I got to go to duty tonight.
Thank
All
you.
right.
It's been a pleasure. And all you guys out there who handle and train military working dogs, male and female, I hope this has been helpful. I hope above all, it stimulates your like intellectual interest in dogs, because I know a few kind of untutored geniuses, people who aren't deep thinkers, but they're super, super successful at dog training. But most of the people I know who are really successful at dog training are bright people who think on a very deep level about dogs. And so you're not just, as you develop as a dog trainer, you're not just becoming better at techniques and getting more experience and all kinds of stuff like that. You're learning to inquire more and more deeply into the business of molding behavior and working dogs, right? And developing theoretical structures and testing one structure against another one to see which one works best for you. So if you ask me what I hope for from this kind of interview, is to not necessarily have people adopt my opinions, but to have people start to think and develop their own opinions that they can support if you ask them to, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
100%. I'm every day. All right, Doc. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Peace out, dude.
Later, man.
Bye.
Bye.